Hey there, trader friends. Good to see you. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about trend lines and how to actually draw a proper trend line and what's one of the pitfalls of trend lines and what can you do about it. And as a fair warning, you are going to see that I am wearing something completely different now than what I am in the rest of this video because I recorded this part a day later. So, don't let that confuse you, whatever, but just enjoy the video. All right, let's get into these trend lines. Okay, so I'm looking here at the Australian dollar against the New Zealand dollar, just using trading view here. And what's important when you're drawing trend lines is that when you're in an uptrend, the trend line needs to go on the bottom. Trend line should not go on the top when you're in an uptrend. There's an exception to that. If you notice that there's maybe a channel that's being produced, then you can put a trend line up on the top as well. You really could call this to be a channel. That's quite possible, and therefore it would be acceptable to have a trend line here up at the top as well. But really, unless you're seeing a very clear channel in an uptrend, the trend line belongs on the bottom. Likewise, if you have a downtrend, the trend line belongs on the top. Again, if you can see that there's a clear channel coming up, then maybe you could do some kind of a trend line down there at the bottom. That's not a real clear channel, so it wouldn't work in this case. The point is, when you have a downtrend, that trend should go at the top of the candles. But you have an issue, and that issue is very important. Where exactly do you draw your trend line? This is actually a perfectly acceptable trend line, and this is also another perfectly acceptable trend line. Which one is really the best trend line to use? A lot of traders would do this because, yeah, it goes through, like this bottom one. Let's just even change the color on that. This bottom one, it goes through this area, but it moves to the last most important resistance before it comes to this area here. Like, imagine if this is like that. Imagine that we can't see this price moving up here. This green line would be a perfectly acceptable trend line as the price is moving up to this level. But the yellow one is also a perfectly acceptable trend line because this has the two highest points that are being used here. And even this is a perfectly acceptable trend line. Let's even change the color here on that as well. We'll just call that some kind of pink. All three of those are perfectly acceptable levels. So which one do you use? And that's a really tough but very important question because you got to remember that the reason price moves is because a lot of other people are placing their orders there. If you have all of these perfectly acceptable trend lines, then you have some people who are going to be using this trend line. You have some people who are going to be using this trend line, and some people who are going to be using this trend line. And you'll have some people who are going to use all three of those. And you're going to have some people say, no, this is the only acceptable trend line. Other people will say, no, this is the only acceptable trend line. You probably will never have a person say this is the only acceptable one, this green one, because they will more than likely find the yellow and the red to also be acceptable. But nonetheless, you have a lot of people who are looking at different trend lines. There's no continuity there, and therefore you're not going to have this massive influx of people who are going to be placing orders at one of these trend lines. That really poses a problem when you are using trend lines as your primary criteria for entry. Let's even take a look here, like this CAD yen. I've already gotten these drawn on here, and I'm just going to make these a little more perfect. Let's just make them a little, it doesn't require to be this perfect, but I just want to make them that perfect just to here continue to demonstrate this point. So here we have two trend lines, and once again, I'm going to change this yellow one. Let's just make you green as well. We got that green one that uses these levels right here. And that's perfectly acceptable there because you have this very, very clear support level going to the last support level that's created before this downward move. And so this would be a very acceptable one. A lot of people would be using that. You can see it never got all the way down to this trend line before it started moving upward. You also have this one, which this is actually the lowest of the entire chart in recent history, moving to the next most prominent level. And it goes up here. And so a lot of people are going to be using this trend line, and some people are going to be saying this trend line. The problem here is, once again, if orders are what move the market, then how are you going to know which trend line to use? because some people will be using one and other people will be using the others. And you don't have this influx of orders to help your trade out. And that poses a problem. That means that this trend line is not as strong as it could be, and this trend line is not as strong as it could be. You want to find something that you're going to be having a lot of people get on board with you. And that is going to make your trade become a winning trade. It is hugely crucial. That's why I don't really care for diagonal trend lines. I think there's a much better way of looking at this. So let's take a look here at the EURCAD, for example. It's a pretty good chart. And what we're looking for is actually horizontal support and resistance. I'm going to come up here and grab this horizontal line here, and I'm just going to put that in the bottom of this area. We're on a daily chart. You can see there's a pretty clear support level. I'm going to put this right down here. It's a pretty clear support level. And we can see that on the daily chart, it really just blew right through that. But in binary options, we're really not trading off a daily chart. We're trading off a much smaller time frame. So I'm going to drop down here to the 5-minute. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to come here and I'm going to put a square around this, because I want to see what's going to happen when the price comes down to this line when it hits this horizontal support level. So let's come down here to 5-minute, and we're going to scroll back. There it is. And look at what happens when it gets down there. You can see that it pretty much stops right there and starts moving back up. It goes over it a little bit, but it stops and it moves back up. On the daily time frame, it really just blew right through it. But on the lower time frame, it saw that level and started moving upward. And the reason being is because everybody is watching these horizontal support and resistance levels. Everybody's watching those. And if everybody's watching them, they're going to be making decisions at those levels. And the decisions that they're going to make are generally going to be buying at support and selling at resistance. So those are levels that you can really count on. Begin to put that into place in your trading, and you're going to start seeing a huge change, a huge improvement in your ability to accurately know where to place your orders. Because what you're doing is you're recognizing where everybody else in the market is looking, where everybody else is going to be making decisions, and you're making your decisions in those same places. It makes a massive difference. You're no longer getting into places where only some people are entering the market, but you're actually getting into places where practically everybody is making a decision, and that's going to make all the difference in the world for you. Okay, great. So join us in the trading room. This is the stuff that we're looking at all the time. We do much deeper dives into that and showing you exactly how to find the really good horizontal support and resistance levels and keeping away from those that aren't quite so strong. It gets really, really cool. So join us in the trading room, and we will see you in the next video or there in the trading room. Have a good day.